Lesson 3, Filling Application Form Part 1. Make sure that you have watched Lesson 2, which is the applicable form, and that you have understood from the specific category that you have to fill which parts are applicable for you to fill in. That's utmost importance. And now here I've also then given you the categories as you would have filled them in, just to revise the form numbers. Form A1 was for professional engineer. Form B1 was for professional engineering technologist. Form C1 was for professional engineering technician. And then Form D1 was for professional certificated engineer. And I will put a link below so you can download the forms from the link if you have not downloaded the forms. As well as I've put a table, which will be a table of equivalence. So you can cross-reference the different categories where the form sections are similar, and you can use that to maybe understand what is required in that form, as some of the forms don't explicitly explain what you require to do. And note that I will be using the form for registering as a professional engineering technologist as a reference across the rest of the video. And yes, I will also leave a link below of the table with the equivalence as you see here. As I'm saying that I'm going to be using the form for applying as a professional engineering technologist, the first part of the form is Form B1.1, now which is not necessarily very hard to fill. The first part that I'd like to put your attention to is Form B1.2, and the section there is section 6, which is a section for filling in the referees. Here are the pointers. Make sure that all the referees know your work personally. And second thing to make sure is that have at least one professional registered in that particular category. If you are registering as a professional technologist, make sure that you at least have one professional engineering technologist. If you are registering as a professional engineer, make sure that you have at least one professional engineer. If you're registering as a professional engineering technician, make sure that you at least have one person in that category. As well as for a certificated engineer, make sure that you at least have one person in that category. And then lastly, you are allowed to also have a supervisor as your referee. It's just now there's a difference on the different application forms. Like for example, on the engineer form, the engineering form requires you to have 2 referees. So if you have one engineer, then you can have one referee who's a supervisor, but they do require from time to time that you at least have an affidavit that explains your particular situation of the supervisor who is not registered with ECSA. But if the supervisor is registered, they are allowed to be registered under any of the other categories. Like if you are registering as an engineer, the supervisor can be a person who's registered as a technician, technologist, or a certificated engineer. As long as you have at least one who's registered as a professional in that particular category. And then the one for registering as an engineering technologist requires you to have at least 3 referees And then if you are having a supervisor who's not ECSA registered, they want you to have 4 referees, of which at least one must be professional engineering technologist and registered, and then the other ones can be a person who is a technician or certificated engineer. Moving over, in this form B2.1, which is your training experience and report, or training experience and outline, the following points. From B2.1, which is the training experience and report, it requires you to be a graduate and have less than 10 years experience in that particular experience. And then if you want to use the B2.1 TEOR form, this requires you to be a graduate and have experience which is more than 10 years. So what must happen is that you must only fill in one of the form B2.1 for the engineering technologist. You are not required to fill in both the TER and the TEO. If you are less than 10 years experienced, it's the TER. If you are more than 10 years, is the TEO. That's it. And then each report is for a specific period, and make sure that they do not overlap. So if you are filling the TER, then you are required to fill in each report as a separate period and as a separate form. So if you have, for example, 6 reports, then you must have 6 B2.1 forms with each report according to the number of periods that you have. And then lastly, when you've done all of this, when you filled all these reports of B2.1, you need to make sure that your words do not exceed 2,000 words, because ECSA is going to be counting the words that you are using. And you have to make sure that your words are below 2,000 or equal to 2,000, of which if the words are more, they can disqualify you just for that. And you don't want to be disqualified for things which are useless. So you will make sure. Lastly, on your form B2.1, TER or TEO, you need to make sure that you are going to tie your organogram, your nature of training or experience, your nature of problem, method of analysis, developing solution and evaluation, role and responsibility, and the degree of responsibility. These things must speak to each other. You cannot have an organogram showing you as a senior, and then you are showing a nature of training which shows you almost as if you are a trainee, and you are showing problems which you were observing. It won't tie up to the people who are going to be reviewing your report. Make sure that all these points that I've put here tie up and make sense. And then ECSA will give you what you deserve. But when this doesn't make sense, then ECSA will reject your report. Now, I'm going to create another video where I'm going to be diving in then the nature of problem and method of analysis, developing solution and evaluation. I'll be diving in and explaining to you how you need to attack writing that part of the report. And then I'll make another video explaining to you how you tie the degrees of responsibility, because they vary. They go from A up until E. So you need to make sure that ECSA understand that you grew from the period that you were a graduate up until now when you are registering as a professional. If ECSA is not able to see this, then they will not register you. Again, if ECSA is not able to see when you're doing work where you don't have someone who's supervising you, then ECSA will again not be able to register you as a professional. And it will also be hard for your referees to sign your work off, because they need to be able to demonstrate to